Welcome viewers. We have been discussing the lecture series on philosophy of mind and we continue with Deniel Dennett today. I am Dr. Ananya Barua and I teach in the Department of Philosophy, Hindu College. Now, Deniel Dennett is one of the most influential philosophers of mind who has made significant contributions to debates on consciousness, free will and cognitive science throughout his career. Before his passing away recently, Dennett continued to explore how evolutionary theory and cognitive neuroscience inform our understanding of the mind and human behavior. If we are to go back to the recent themes in Dennett's work, we would largely find his significant contributions in the field of, firstly, consciousness and illusionism. Dennett maintained his view that consciousness, as commonly understood, is a construct of the brain. His illusionist stance argues that what we perceive as a rich inner experience is an interpretive narrative crafted by neural processes. This has influenced current debates on the nature of subjective experience and consciousness. Secondly, in the field of free will and determinism, Dennett continued to argue for a compatibilist view of free will, suggesting that human freedom is compatible with deterministic physical laws. He emphasized that the kind of free will worth having involves rational deliberation and moral responsibility shaped by evolutionary and cultural processes. We also find Dennett's imprint in interdisciplinary project. His recent work served as a bridge between philosophy and the sciences, particularly cognitive science and artificial intelligence. Dennett's framework inspired research on how consciousness might emerge in machines and how human cognition can inform AI development. Further, we also find the relevance of Dennett vis-a-vis his critiques of Cartesian dualism. Dennett remained a vocal critique of Cartesian dualism, promoting the idea that the brain is not a Cartesian theater, where experiences play out, but a distributed system without a central point of control. This view influenced ongoing debates on embodied cognition and enactivism in philosophy and neuroscience. Dennett's final contributions highlight his role as a thinker who synthesized ideas across disciplines to address fundamental questions about the mind, reality, and our place in the natural world. His legacy continues to be explored in special issues and symposia dedicated to his work. Deniel Dennett's critique of René Descartes, particularly in the context of dualism and the Cartesian theater, have been central to his philosophy of mind. Dennett challenges Descartes' notion of mind-body dualism and his framing of consciousness as a unified inner theater where experiences occur. Now, we would see in our section the key critiques of Descartes done by Deniel Dennett. The first point of criticism that Deniel Dennett had done for René Descartes was, number one, rejection of dualism. Descartes' dualism posits that the mind is a non-material substance separate from the body, interacting via the pineal gland. Dennett, in contrast, asserts that consciousness and mental states are entirely products of physical processes in the brain. He sees dualism as an unnecessary and unscientific explanation, describing it as a myth that has hindered progress in understanding the mind scientifically. The second criticism of Dennett against René Descartes is the Cartesian theater critique. Dennett coined the term Cartesian theater to criticize the idea of a central place in the brain where all sensory data converge for a viewer to experience them. He argues that this view is deeply flawed because it assumes a homunculus, a similar self observing from within, leading to an infinite regress. Instead, Dennett advocates for the multiple drafts model where consciousness is decentralized and consists of parallel competing processes with no central stage. We also find the third criticism against René Descartes by Deniel Dennett, and that is the intentional stance versus ghost in the machine. Dennett's intentional stance offers an alternative to Descartes' metaphysical dualism. By interpreting mental states as emergent properties of complex physical systems, he rejects the ghost in the machine idea. Descartes' view of the soul or mind as a separate causal agent. We also further see the evolutionary explanation of consciousness, which has been criticized by Dennett vis-a-vis René Descartes. Dennett emphasizes that consciousness and human cognitive abilities are the products of evolutionary processes rather than a divine or immaterial essence, as Descartes might imply. He critiques Descartes' approach as disconnected from the biological realities of how minds evolve and function. Further, there is also the coinage of the concept called philosophical illusions coined by Dennett against Descartes. Dennett sees Descartes' framework as one of many philosophical illusions about the mind. By relying on introspection and assuming the existence of an inner self, Descartes mistook the narrative structure of human thought for an actual theater of experience. Dennett dismantles this notion, aligning consciousness with narrative constructions formed through neural activity rather than as a place or entity. So, we see that Dennett's broader influence vis-a-vis by rejecting Cartesian dualism and redefining consciousness through a naturalistic and materialistic lens, Dennett has shaped contemporary debates in philosophy, neuroscience, and artificial intelligence. His critique has encouraged a move away from introspective mystical notions of the mind towards empirically grounded theories. Now, we will be dealing with some of the primary readings where Descartes has been criticized by Deniel Dennett, and the following display will clarify. Deniel Dennett critiques Descartes extensively in his work where he deconstructs Cartesian dualism and the Cartesian theater. Some of the key primary readings include Consciousness Explained, published in 1991. Descartes' most famous critique of Descartes is found here. He introduces the multiple drafts model, directly opposing the Cartesian theater concept, and argues against the idea of a centralized self observing mental events. This book is foundational for understanding Dennett's arguments against dualism and introspective models of consciousness. The Intentional Stance, 1987. In this work, while focusing on the intentionality of mental states, Dennett contrasts his naturalistic and functionalist views with Descartes' dualistic framework. He critiques the ghost in the machine view implicit in Cartesian thought. Brainstorms, Philosophical Essays, Mind and Psychology, published in 1978. This collection contains essays addressing foundational issues in the philosophy of mind. In several essays, Dennett critiques the Cartesian perspective on the mind-body relationship, laying groundwork for his later works. The Elbow Room, The Varieties of Free Will, Worth Wanting, 1984. While focused on free will, Dennett critiques the Cartesian conception of human agency and its reliance on an immaterial soul or mind. The fifth one is Darwin's Dangerous Idea, 1995. Dennett extends his critique of Cartesian dualism by arguing that consciousness and cognitive processes can be fully explained through evolutionary principles, rejecting Descartes' metaphysical assumptions. We also have From Bacteria to Batch and Back, The Evolution of Minds, 2017. In this work, Dennett revisits and expands upon his critiques of Cartesian dualism, offering evolutionary explanations for the emergence of human minds, further dismantling Descartes' dualistic framework. Now, if we actually look through these works, we see there is a continuous themes which is found in his critiques. They range from the rejection of the Cartesian theater, an emphasis on distributed, non-centralized process in consciousness, the naturalization of mind and cognition through evolution, the dismissal of introspection as a reliable method for understanding consciousness. These texts collectively articulate Dennett's comprehensive critique of Cartesian dualism and its legacy in philosophy of mind. Now, we have to understand that over and above, there has been the resurgence of the concept of Cartesian theater when we talk about Dennett's criticism against René Descartes. So, our point of discussion right now is what is the Cartesian theater and why was it criticized? Now, the Cartesian theater is a term coined by Deniel Dennett that describes a flawed model of consciousness based on René Descartes' dualistic framework. According to this metaphor, there is a central theater in the brain where sensory inputs and mental events are presented to a single observer, essentially a self, or what he calls as a homunculus, that experiences and integrates all mental activities. Now, this model suggests the following. The first is about central processing. Conscious experiences are sequentially viewed in one place in the brain. Secondly, unified observer. There is a central entity or self that observes, interprets, and makes sense of these experiences. While Descartes never explicitly proposed the theater as a concept, Dennett uses it to critique Cartesian dualism, where mind and body are distinct entities interacting to create unified conscious experience. So, Dennett's criticism of the Cartesian theater can be summarized as follows. The first is the homunculus problem. The Cartesian theater assumes an observer within the brain to witness experiences, which leads to an infinite regress, that is, who observes the observer. Secondly, Dennett points out that this is philosophically and biologically untenable because it implies a central agent within the brain, a notion unsupported by neuroscience. The second point has been about distributed processing. Now, the first part of the distributed processing is Dennett proposes the multiple drafts model as an alternative, arguing that consciousness arises from distributed and parallel processes in the brain rather than a central unified theater. Second part, there is no singular location or sequence where consciousness occurs. It is instead a product of competing neural narratives. The third part has been about misunderstanding of consciousness. The Cartesian theater implies that experiences are first processed unconsciously and then presented to consciousness. But Dennett argues that this creates a false distinction. Further, consciousness does not observe experiences. It emerges directly from the brain's decentralized dynamic interactions. Fourth, empirical failures. Neuroscientific evidence does not support the existence of a central processing center. Instead, it indicates that different brain regions contribute to various aspects of consciousness in a distributed manner. So, we do see that the broader impact of Dennett's rejection of the Cartesian theater has been influential in philosophy of mind, cognitive science and AI. It shifts the focus from searching for a singular set of consciousness to exploring how decentralized neural processes give rise to the phenomena we experience as conscious awareness. Further, now we will be focusing on Deniel Dennett and Frank Jackson's dialogue or interplay that had conspired between the two. This is important because Frank Jackson is a phenomenalist. He started his project in philosophy of mind as a phenomenalist with his work What Mary Did Not Know, but post his interactions with Deniel Dennett, he has been converted to a materialist himself. So, this is the reason why after René Descartes, we are now going ahead with Frank Jackson and Deniel Dennett's influence on each other. So, we see that the interplay between Deniel Dennett and Frank Jackson centers on their respective positions in philosophy of mind, particularly regarding consciousness, qualia, which by now we understand as the subjective qualities of experience, and the mind-body problem. Both philosophers are key figures in shaping debates about physicalism and the nature of subjective experience, but their views often stand in contrast. Dennett's critique of Jackson. Attack on the knowledge argument. Dennett strongly rejects the knowledge argument, calling it flawed. He argues that if Mary truly knows all the physical facts about color, she would already know what it is like to see red, because a complete understanding of the physical includes the subjective experience. For Dennett, there is no extra knowledge beyond the physical. Dennett sees the idea of qualia as a misstep, labeling it as a philosophical illusion that arises from our introspective tendencies, which he views as unreliable. Dennett further argues that Jackson's Mary experiment is persuasive only because it exploits our intuitions. These intuitions, Dennett claims, are misleading. He insists that subjective experiences or qualia can be explained in terms of the brain's physical and functional processes without invoking mysterious non-physical properties. Jackson's response and later alignment. Interestingly, Jackson later revised his position, aligning more closely with physicalism. He conceded that his knowledge argument does not necessarily undermine physicalism, but instead highlights the limitations of how we conceptualize knowledge. Dennett's critiques and the broader debates within philosophy of mind played a significant role in this shift. Dennett and Jackson's debates pushed philosophers to clarify the relationship between physicalism, subjective experience, and neuroscience. The dialogue has had a long-lasting impact on the development of materialist and functionalist theories of consciousness, with Dennett's naturalistic approach gaining traction in cognitive science and AI. Dennett's views have influenced illusionism, the idea that qualia are not fundamental but rather constructed interpretations. Jackson's thought experiments, meanwhile, continue to serve as a key reference for anti-physicalist arguments even as his own stance shifted. Together, Dennett and Jackson's work exemplifies the dynamic interplay of critique and revision that drives philosophy forward. Their discussions remain central to ongoing debates about nature of mind and consciousness. Now, here is a comparative table contrasting Frank Jackson's Mary argument with Deniel Dennett's Robo-Mary counterexample alongside their philosophical implications. Now, if we notice at this slide which has been displayed here, we see that the aspect which is the core premise between Jackson's Mary argument and Dennett's Robo-Mary counterexample. Jackson's Mary argument: Mary is a color scientist who knows all physical facts about color but has never seen it. When she sees red, she learns something new, suggesting the existence of non-physical properties, qualia. Dennett's Robo-Mary, on the other hand, was designed to know all physical facts about color and stimulate human understanding that can predict and explain experiences like red without ever seeing it, challenging the need for non-physical properties. The objective has been from the Jackson's Mary argument to argue against physicalism by showing that knowing all physical facts does not encompass subjective experience. Dennett's Robo-Mary counterexample was to refute the knowledge argument by demonstrating that knowing all physical facts entails understanding subjective experiences. The knowledge argument inside, under Jackson's Mary argument, it distinguishes between propositional knowledge and phenomenal knowledge. Jackson claims the latter cannot be reduced to the former. Dennett's Robo-Mary counterexample claims the distinction is illusory. If Mary truly knew all physical facts, this would include the structure and processes behind subjective experience. View on qualia: Jackson's view on qualia are non-physical, irreducible aspects of consciousness experiences, highlighting the hard problem of consciousness. Dennett's Robo-Mary counterexample, on the other hand, qualia are philosophical illusions, constructs arising from misunderstandings of introspection and incomplete physical knowledge. The methodology: Jackson's Mary argument uses a thought experiment emphasizing intuition about subjective experience. Dennett's Robo-Mary counterexample uses the methodology where it employs a counter thought experiment that applies computational and functionalist reasoning. The philosophical position: Jackson's Mary argument supports dualism or property dualism. Some aspects of the mind cannot be explained physically. Dennett's Robo-Mary counterexample supports physicalism and functionalism. All aspects of mind, including subjective experience, can be explained by physical processes. The criticisms of opponent: Jackson's Mary argument states that physicalism fails to account for subjective experiences. Knowledge of physical facts cannot bridge the explanatory gap. Dennett's Robo-Mary counterexample states that the Mary argument exploits intuition and ignores the completeness of physical explanations. Dennett insists that if Mary were fully informed, she would predict and know the experience of red. If we are to look at the strengths, we see that Jackson's Mary argument highlights the intuitive distinction between knowing about a phenomena and experiencing it. On the other hand, Dennett's Robo-Mary counterexample's strength offers a mechanistic and scientifically plausible explanation of how knowledge and subjective experiences relate. If we are to talk about the weaknesses, we see that Jackson's Mary argument, the vulnerable to critiques about the ambiguity of knowing all physical facts and its implications. Dennett's critics argue that Dennett underestimates the phenomenological richness of experience and oversimplifies subjective experience. We also see that the broader implications. Mary's argument suggests limits to physicalist approaches, leaving room for alternative explanation of consciousness. Dennett, on the other hand, challenges anti-physicalist arguments, supporting a unified framework for mind and brain in neuroscience and AI research. So we will be continuing the debate between Mary's learning debate with Jackson and Dennett Robomary in our next lecture. Thank you.